Do you like the metaverse? Because I like the metaverse, and I'm really excited that Virtua's Cardano Island is sponsoring this episode. Cardano Island is one of those projects I'm excited to have in our ecosystem. There are small, medium, and large plots, also condos, plans for 4 main sections, different zones and districts, fan caves to display NFTs, 6 different land resources, land bots, non-player character slots, slots for our Cardano Summit 2021 NFTs, other games, and lots more features. I bought a large plot on Cardano Island, and I can't wait to be on my land to see what this becomes. Check out cardano.virtua.com or click the link below. I've been saying it for a while, but crypto is finally getting to this tipping point, to this critical mass, where we'll be big enough that the regulators in all their various guises will actually start trying to apply all the current rules and regulations to crypto. The big problem is that there's a gap. There's a certain amount of empty space between how crypto thinks the rules are going to apply and how the regulators will actually try to apply them. In a lot of ways, crypto still thinks that code is law and decentralization makes us different. But we're starting to see some pushback from the traditional system. Apparently, some regulators disagree with us. They think that the law is the law, and they don't seem to care if we fall in the gap. Ready? Let's go. Today, we are going to discuss the U.S. federal sanctions against TornadoCash and certain of its users, concerns about clawbacks among users of centralized finance platforms like Celsius and Voyager, a very interesting survey that shows just how big the metaverse might get, an upcoming Cardano Metaverse concert, and the perfect crypto insult. If your first thought upon seeing this gentleman's predicament is, no thanks, I'll just skip any activity where Snow might try to murder me. Or if you're finding value in these videos each weekday, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. Well, here it is, guys. The Office of Foreign Assets Control of the U.S. Department of the Treasury has sanctioned a decentralized platform, TornadoCash, in all of its various manifestations, has been put on an OFAC sanctions list along with a whole bunch of Ethereum addresses. These are all users who have interacted with TornadoCash. Obviously, this is a list of users that OFAC seem to be interested in, along with some USDC addresses. Treasury's motivation for doing this probably isn't going to end up being as interesting as the rationale for why it's okay for them to do this. You'll remember when we discussed the Axie Infinity Ronin network exploit, we talked about Lazarus Group, the North Korean hackers. They were also said to have laundered some of their ill-gotten gains through TornadoCash. That alone is plenty enough for an agency like Treasury to throw TornadoCash and all these other addresses on the sanctions list. To us in crypto, this might not make sense. We know TornadoCash is a decentralized platform. It's a smart contract. It's just a bunch of code, and anybody can use it. Maybe some North Korean hackers used it. Maybe a lot of people use it innocently. And we've always had this perception that if something's decentralized like that in crypto, then certainly it's immune from regulation. After all, we've got freedom of speech in the United States, and this is just code that's been deployed to the network. Nobody's running this. It's just code that was written by somebody and deployed to the blockchain. It just runs. It's decentralized. Nobody's assisting any North Korean hackers. It was just a matter of free speech for the developers to write this code. Treasury doesn't care. They don't care about any of those free speech arguments. They don't care what we think decentralization means. All they know is that they hate North Korean hackers, and they're going to try to take down any mechanism North Korean hackers are using to enable their hacking that might possibly fall within not even the jurisdiction of Treasury, but might possibly be vulnerable to them reaching out and touching it somehow. In this case, they were pretty successful. Now that TornadoCash is on the sanctions list, no American citizen can interact with TornadoCash. And even Roman Semenov, who tells us his big occupation lately was building TornadoCash and other privacy and scalability related stuff for Ethereum, Roman Semenov reports, my GitHub account was just suspended. Is writing an open source code illegal now? This is an important moment to note. In crypto, there's always been this notion that you could write code, and as long as the platform was deployed and it ran on a decentralized basis, there was nothing to worry about. But the federal government, US federal government, doesn't seem to care. Roman Semenov certainly thinks that deploying open source code shouldn't possibly be illegal. US Treasury does not care at all. All they had to do was put the smart contract itself, the platform itself, all they had to do was put it on their sanctions list, and all of a sudden, large corporations are going along with that and revoking Roman Semenov's ability to make GitHub commits. But it wasn't just GitHub. Here we see the report, Circle just froze 75,000 USDC belonging to unsuspecting Tornado users, as well as 149 USDC donated to the project. I have no idea how unsuspecting these Tornado users were, but what this shows us is that companies in crypto that fall within the regulatory reach of US regulators, they're not going to stand up and say, hey, this is crypto. We're not going to do what you want. They're totally going to do whatever those regulators want them to do. This is super hilarious because just back in June of this year, the CEO of Circle was involved in this exchange. A lot of people are learning about the USDC blacklist function today. To clear things up, Circle, the issuer of USDC, can freeze USDC in any address at any time for whatever reason. This is the risk of using centralized stablecoins, just like using any centralized service. That was put out there by an Ethereum maximalist, to which Jeremy Allaire, CEO of Circle, responded, not accurate, not helpful FUD, read more. And then here we are in August, and we see this headline, Circle freezes USDC funds in TornadoCash's US Treasury sanctioned wallets. Of course, crypto Twitter had some funny takes on this. Like this one, money laundering remains most effective through USD mixing service HSBC. But this one was probably my favorite. Now is the best time to send Tornado to ETH to every VC. This time it was Roman Semenov and a crypto mixer that happened to get used by a North Korean hacker group. Purportedly. But what if next time it's a North American developer of a DeFi platform? What if that DeFi platform is enabling people to purchase or trade in things that outside of crypto would be called securities, or it's allowing people to do things that normally only banks can do under heavy banking regulation? We have to start thinking about whether or not this same rationale for regulation, for sanctioning in this case, could also be used to regulate a decentralized DeFi platform. We know now that they don't care about this free speech argument with code, that writing code and deploying it is just free speech. They don't care about that. They threw the platform on the sanctions list. And I'm not saying they'll go down that same route with DeFi platforms. They're probably not going to sanction DeFi platforms through Treasury and OFAC. But this does show that they're willing to go after decentralized platforms and protocols directly. What if you bought a bunch of governance tokens of a DeFi platform, and somebody who would normally regulate some financial activity comes along and says, hey, you're doing this financial activity, or you're allowing people to buy and sell securities, or you're selling people securities? What if that regulator comes along and says, hey, we're going to go after the platform, and we're going to convince companies like GitHub and USDC to not deal with the platform or the developer of the platform, and we're just going to go about it that way. We've already seen that the federal government doesn't care about this. I just deployed code. It's run on a decentralized basis. There's no human being behind the platform anymore. They don't care about those arguments. They're willing to go after the platform directly. And if you were an investor in a platform like that and that happened, that might be detrimental. Granted, going after a DeFi platform with North American or EU developers is probably a lot more likely to result in legal challenge to whatever the regulators are trying to do. But if they are as successful in getting companies like Circle, who controls USDC, to not interact with that platform, and getting companies like GitHub to revoke the accounts of all the developers, this is still a pretty serious gap that the crypto space might have to get over somehow. I wish that was the only place where crypto expectations aren't meeting regulatory interpretations, or at least legal interpretations. Here we see a post from Simon Dixon. People keep asking me about the likelihood of clawbacks from those that withdrew from Celsius 90 days prior to locking withdrawals after Thomas Braziel discussion. I believe if Chapter 11 moves to liquidity, it's likely. If Celsius is bought and moves on as Nuco, it's unlikely. We also saw this post from a large account with 100 and almost 59,000 followers. Expect the best, plan for the worst, and prepare to be surprised. DM me if you want to join a clawback protection Telegram group that already has 500 members. Clawbacks could apply if you withdraw assets from Celsius or Voyager within 90 days of their bankruptcy filing day. This is a collision of the crypto notion of finality of transactions with the awesome power of bankruptcy proceedings. And if you think about how bankruptcies work, you pretty much have to give the bankruptcy administrators the ability to claw back assets. If you didn't, then everybody would just declare bankruptcy. But before they did that, they would come up with a bunch of fake transactions to their friends and other people, straw man transactions where they're actually going to get the assets back at some later date. If bankruptcy couldn't claw back those assets, everybody would try to do that. They would somehow come up with a bunch of seemingly legit transactions where they send away all their assets, and then they suddenly have to file for bankruptcy. So we pretty much have to have this kind of clawback ability in our bankruptcy proceedings. But in crypto, we also have this notion that if you send your assets somewhere, there's no way to get them back. Unfortunately, if in bankruptcy proceedings, they find out that even a crypto platform, albeit a centralized one like Celsius or Voyager, has sent you assets and right before their bankruptcy, and they can figure out who you are, the law isn't going to care about crypto transaction finality. They're just going to claw back those assets. Of course, there are all kinds of technical conditions that need to be satisfied for assets to be clawed back in a bankruptcy. But what I'm saying is, if a bankruptcy court decides that the bankruptcy administrators should claw back assets, they're not going to care about any notions of crypto transaction finality. PwC recently completed a Metaverse survey, and their results are pretty surprising. They surveyed 5,000 consumers and 1,000 business leaders. One of the big questions was how much these companies are working on metaverse projects, metaverse activities, metaverse things. The surprising part is that 67% of the companies said they were actively engaged in working on metaverse things. So when they say actively engaged, that's defined as either building proofs of concept, implementing use cases, or generating revenue from transactions. Up here earlier in this little report, they say that's beyond just metaverse experimentation. So this isn't companies like talking about metaverse things, just experimenting with ideas. This is actively engaged. When we look at the companies that we're just sort of looking into it, we get to 87% of all companies. So companies, at least in the US, are very, very interested in the metaverse. So the next question was about when they expect it to actually be a part of their normal business activities, when they expect the metaverse to be business as usual for their company. And here again, we find 82% of the companies think this will be a normal part of their business within 2 to 3 years. But of course, when they compare those business leaders to consumers, we find a pretty stark contrast. So this graph lays out sort of how much these consumers and business leaders are into metaverse things or understand metaverse things. And we see over here on the never heard of it end of the graph, 21% of consumers never heard of it. Only 3% of business leaders never heard of it. We get down here to have a good understanding of the metaverse. 19% of consumers thought they had a good understanding, while 45% of business leaders say they have a good understanding. When we get to have a detailed understanding and stay up to date, 23% feel like they have a detailed understanding, while only 8% of consumers. So it looks like the businesses, the companies are far ahead of the consumers in terms of metaverse adoption. And this makes sense. In the context of some of the discussions we've had about this scenario where consumers might be walking into some virtual world, some metaverse project, and there might be something like a digital headquarters for a business with actual live human employees, doing things through avatars, interacting with these consumers. It makes sense that the supply probably has to exist before the demand from these consumers. But we also have to ask the question, will the consumers follow these businesses into the metaverse, or will they just not care? Having watched the massive adoption of video games during my lifetime, you already know my answer. Speaking of the metaverse, FutureFest is having another Cardano Metaverse concert. This one's happening on August 10th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And there's all kinds of acts performing, not just these four. I've seen them sort of adding additional acts. Looks like it's going to be a good time. I still have yet to attend one of these. I really want to, though. I'm going to try hard to finish my video on time on August 10th and go to this thing. But just in case I don't, if any of you go to this, please let me know how it is. I really want to go to one of these and see if it's fun. I'm really curious if metaverse concerts can be super fun. I kind of think they probably are. I think we might have recently found the perfect crypto insult. In response to some of Mark Cuban's sort of notoriously, I don't want to say anti-Cardano, but kind of like notoriously indifferent to Cardano, notoriously ignorant of Cardano, whatever you want to call it. Mark Cuban doesn't love Cardano. Mati of Cardano fans had this to say. In my honest opinion, this is Web 2 thinking. As soon as I saw that, I realized I'm probably just going to use this in all facets of my life. Like if I get pulled over by a cop for speeding, I'm going to wait till he comes to my window. And then I'm going to very calmly say, bro, this fixation on velocity, in my honest opinion, is Web 2 thinking. I'm utterly convinced that will result in 0 speeding tickets for the rest of my life. I hope you're having a great week, and I will talk to you tomorrow.